Hi, Karisa.
Thank you for being here.
I'm happy to have this space here with you today.
Yeah.
You're a trained special educator and you're a founder of your own education company, Holistic Education Services. Now, before we get into talking about your company, I want to hear a little bit more about you. So, what brought you into education?
Yeah. Great question. I come from a family of educators. And I think when most people hear that, they're like, oh, like teachers in school, but it's a little bit more of an eclectic story. So I want to explain a little bit about my mom's history and then my dad's history. So my dad is a theological teacher, and he escaped the draft in Iran for the Iran-Iraq War when he was 15 and lived in Portugal. Then he was sponsored to come to the US, and he really wanted to study Christianity because he found it to be a better religion for him than Islam. And as he began studying and going to college and going to seminary, people started asking him, hey, can you teach us? Hey, can you be our pastor? And so he actually started an Iranian church when I was really little. We moved to Atlanta when I was 1. A church in Atlanta asked us to move here to work with international students. And my parents were also working with refugees in Atlanta. And so because my dad had this way of like connecting people, Iranians were asking him like, hey, can you be our pastor? He started a church. My parents were like really busy all the time. We always had people over at our house. And it was a very busy like childhood. But I always saw my dad teaching every Sunday and working with people in this like ministry aspect throughout the week. And then my mom, she played piano for the church, but then she also was the Sunday school teacher for the kids. So I grew up with a lot of refugee kids and seeing my mom teaching every week in Sunday school. She was a Spanish teacher, she was a pre-K teacher, and went on to become a piano teacher, and she still is a piano teacher.
Oh, wow.
Her parents were missionaries in Colombia, and her great-grandparents were missionaries in Brazil. And both my great-grandparents and my grandparents started schools in those countries. And they started schools in the remote jungles with indigenous tribes to help teach them Spanish so that they could have access to resources. Because back in like after World War II and then like in the drug war in Colombia, indigenous tribes really were looked down upon and like didn't have much access to many things, right? So eventually my grandparents, the drug war in Colombia became so dangerous for Americans to be there that they had to start training Colombians to carry on the work themselves. And so my grandparents started an institute, a school for Colombian people to continue the work in their own country so that Americans could then leave. And they started it like from the ground up, like buying the property. My mom grew up mixing cement and making like cement bricks and writing their own curriculum, teaching like Bible courses. And the mission that they were in was about working with tribal people, often like in the most remote areas that didn't have a written language. So actually just last year, the tribe that like my mom, when she was a baby, she grew up in the jungle. And so it takes like decades to like come up with the language, like translate the Bible, and we'll get into, you know, some of the political and nuanced perspectives later with that. But it's very intense work. Like the level of dedication that you have to have is like very extreme.
I can't imagine.
I think watching my family, I didn't really grow up around my grandparents or great grandparents, but seeing my mom and dad teach just became very like a natural skill for me. So I didn't necessarily like go to college for early childhood education, like thinking I was going to become a teacher. I did want to become a teacher when I was really little. I wanted to be an artist and I wanted to be a teacher. But then I kind of lost that. And then eventually I came back to it because I was always doing things related to teaching. And it just always felt kind of like easy or natural for me. Like I don't really have to think that hard about it.
Right. So you grew up in Atlanta.
Yes.
And so you did all of your schooling here.
No.
And then, oh, you did?
I actually lived in the UK when I was 8. We moved to Birmingham, England. And my dad was getting his PhD in Islamic studies at the University of Birmingham in England. And he was writing his PhD on interfaith dialogue between Muslims and Christians in Iran specifically.
Oh, that's fascinating.
In the early 2000s. So like in 2002, we moved over there and we lived over there for 3 years. So the majority of my elementary school education was in the British school system. And even though it was a hard adjustment living in like a very different country with very different culture and not having friends and like just like my parents didn't have any plan. Like we just kind of stayed at like random people's homes until we could establish a life. But the education, I loved learning so much. Like the learning became my safe haven. And I found that their ways of teaching were so much more hands-on, so much more interactive. They were so deeply into poetry and science and like art and music and drama is like super popular over there. And I was so used to in America having textbooks and doing worksheets and doing the same things all the time. Yeah. So over there, we didn't have any textbooks. We would have journals where we would write, but it was all like extremely interactive. So that informs a lot of my current teaching practices today.
I see.
When we did come back, so my education in Atlanta from pre-K to second grade and then middle school was at a very, very traditional Christian private school that no longer exists today, but it was founded in the 60s, late 50s, 60s, when this family, their son, had polio, couldn't go to school. So they started a homeschool that eventually became like an established school in a building.
I see.
So I really loved the school when I was younger. By the time I was in middle school, some things had changed and the teachers were very, very harsh and very strict. And I suffered a lot from just like depression and anxiety, which many middle schoolers do anyways, but it was extremely small class sizes. There were 12 people in my 6th grade, 7 people in my 7th grade, and maybe 8 people in my 8th grade.
Wow, that is very small.
So to always feel like you have like adults like watching over you and reprimanding you and being very like harsh, isn't like a very fun experience.
Yeah, that can be a lot for a middle schooler to deal with day in and day out.
Mm-hmm.
So,
after middle school, I was accepted with a scholarship to Westminster, which is the richest, most elite private school in Atlanta. And I was didn't know what I was getting into. I wasn't very clued into the culture. It definitely had this like very old racist vibe, where people were very, very much rejected outsiders and treated you very cold if like they didn't know you. And it was highly segregated. So this was also my freshman year was when Obama was elected, and they were like rioting because they were like so mad. Like they were like super upset. And the friendship groups were always like the immigrant kids or the kids of color who were on like financial aid had like their own friend group. And then it was like almost all like the rich white kids, and then like some rich kids of color who had been there for a long time, but just like hardly any, you know, like very, very few. Having all these different cultural experiences from growing up around refugees and immigrants to then living in the UK, where we were like living in a white suburb, but then also attending an Iranian church in the UK too. Coming back to the States, being this like ultra Christian, like very like conservative school, and then going into this very like highly rich, private, racist, elitist environment where kids were like so ultra driven that they were so stressed out, to where like eating disorders were like 3 times the rate of the national average among teenage girls in my high school. Wow. Kids would brag about how much they didn't sleep. Everybody was just, it's interesting because you would think that kids with a lot of money are like, oh, I'm set, I'm good. I'm like, got a cushy life, I got a trust fund, can work at my dad's company. A lot of those kids have like the worst mental health ever because they have this idea that their success comes from like destroying themselves in order to make money.
What was it like for you to go through so many different, like you went through such a mix of educational experiences. What was it like for you to finally end up at that high school and then graduate from there?
Graduating was definitely one of the happiest days of my life, for sure. I definitely learned how to not give into the noise or not really follow the crowd. And I feel like I had a lot of tough skin from my younger years. But as a teenager, all of the huge life transitions really caught up to me. And I went through so many deep things that I didn't know how to deal with. And I was really into running. That was a big thing for me. But I also, as much as you try to just be like, oh, I'm my own person, you know, I don't hang out with that crowd, or, you know, they're not like that. If you're in that culture every single day, the stress can like still really get to you. So I definitely over pushed myself as an athlete. It was like too much. I was pushing myself to the point of exhaustion. But if everybody around you is doing that, you don't stand out for that.
It becomes like normal.
Becomes very normal. Yeah. I did start going to therapy when I was a teenager. And back then, I mean, it was like a secret. Like, I wouldn't let anybody know. I wouldn't like talk about it. It was definitely not normal back then to talk about those things. Yeah. But that therapist was very helpful for me to start talking about some of these like deep family histories and my emotions, and how I can only control me. Like, I can't control like other people around me. Helped me process a lot of anger, a lot of hurt, a lot of shame. So I really benefited from that. So when I graduated high school, I felt very proud of myself that not only did I survive that environment, but I also worked through so many deep mental health challenges. Again, though, for high school, the learning itself became my safe haven. So I feel very blessed that I had such an amazing education. I feel like it's a huge gift that I had such incredible teachers. I was taught how to write amazing, research amazing, like push myself with math, even though it was really hard. And that's why it's so important to me that our students get to enjoy that love of learning and learn things that they're passionate about and find a safe place within themselves as they're learning, while also like really pushing themselves to embrace the learning curve, because it can be really demoralizing when you're like bad at a subject and you're like, oh, I'm failing this, I'm so stressed out, and it becomes a snowball effect. And I think everybody has felt that at some point in their life. So how cool would it be if in first and second grade you already had skills for those times of your life, you know? Mm-hmm. So that's why I did study public health in college a bit. And that's why I really see this company as addressing many public health issues in society. Because if we know how to have healthy self-esteem and we know how to believe in ourselves, then we'll probably make healthier decisions. You know, we won't be driven by these external forces of feeling like you have to live to other people's standards or nobody understands you or what have you.
Okay. Yeah. So you studied public health, and then what brought you back into education, but this time as an educator yourself?
Yeah, I was pre-med, and I feel like I wasn't exposed to that many career options in my mind. I was just like, okay, I'm just applying to college. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that looks like. You know, I'm going to this elite high school. Everybody applies to college. My mom's side of the family, as much as they were pro-education, they were not highly educated at all and really did not prioritize like higher education. But my dad, Iranians value education a lot. He really wanted me to go to like a really great college and was highly supportive, which is a big gift. In my life, I had only been exposed to like missionaries and pastors, or I was like, or a doctor or a lawyer. I don't know what's out there. I don't know what I can do. I do remember them saying, like 2011, 2012, I remember the news being like, jobs for your generation will look completely different and they might not even exist right now. I remember them saying that back then. That's why I think it's great to have that perspective even now with AI.
Yeah,
it's even more. Now. So I did have that perspective, but I had a great biology teacher and I loved the idea of helping people. So I was like, I'll study medicine. Why not? And I got accepted into Washington University in St. Louis, which is really known for their medical school. It's the top medical school. Because they have such a top medical school and a big hospital, they have a really competitive pre-med program for undergrads. Got there so competitive, so ruthless, huge auditoriums, like full of kids. Like I had no idea what I had really signed up for. I couldn't keep up, barely passed chemistry and calculus. And so I was like, can't do it. It was really, again, really high stress, high pressure environment with like really success driven kids. And that's never really been my personality. I'm not, I love working. I'm definitely a workaholic, but I'm not like, I have to make all this money and like I have to, you know, like my parents will stop supporting me if I'm not a doctor. Like it wasn't like those other kids, you know? I really wanted to find what I was good at. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Iranians will be killed in Iran for being Christian. And from a young age, I was always very aware of the risks and the oppressions of the world, and always made it a really big point to study and learn about these topics globally in different cases. And my dad and my mom both grew up in wars, right? In war-torn like countries.
You said your mom grew up in Colombia?
Yeah. And I mean, when my dad was little, the revolution hadn't happened yet, but by the time the revolution happened and then the Iraq war happened, and the country just like completely changed. So they weren't at that time able to really talk about their lives. I knew the basics, but they have their own PTSD, right, that they were going through, and they had their own baggage and heaviness and their own emotions that they were trying to process. And so when I was in high school, I really wanted to teach myself about Iran. And there were like 2 books in my high school library and a little bit of stuff online, right? I mean, but that was early 2010s. I mean, it's not like it was now, you know? So I became very interested in feminism because women are treated like second-class citizens in Iran. And I remember like going to protests with my dad, or just like really wishing that I knew more information. I was also part of like this like girls empowerment group when I was in high school, like mentorship groups. So when I applied to college, they like randomly selected me to be part of this cohort called Women in Science. And I didn't know what it was, but not a lot of people got the invitation. And so I was like, well, of course I'm going to do it. You know, I'm all about like studying about women and, you know, empowering women. And so it was kind of like I had to take Women Gender Studies 101 and some Women Gender Studies classes with the pre-med classes. But because I dropped out of the pre-med classes, the school also had a really great global health program. And so I kind of switched from studying the hard sciences to studying anthropology. And a lot of the social sciences at that university were very related. You could take different courses that could count as either African American studies, women gender studies, anthropology, public health. Like these were all very related types of courses that you could count for different majors, right? When I was a high school senior and I was applying to colleges, the school also had a program called like pre-orientation, where you could sign up for different like camps before university started. And I didn't want to do it. My parents were like, you have to. Like, you have to sign up for a pre-orientation. I was like, no, I just like want to be a regular kid. Like, I just want to show up when everybody shows up. Like, no, like, it's good for you. You got to do it. You got to pay for it. I was like, okay. So I had some babysitting money, and the pre-med one was already booked up. It was very popular. So the only one that they had still open was a slam poetry one. And this was, again, in 2012, slam poetry was like pretty new. YouTube was like pretty new. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna go do like slam poetry. And my parents were like, what is this? And I was so passionate about it. I'm like, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna perform poetry. And they were like, all right, well, we told you to pick one. You picked one, like, go do it. So this poetry group was like very passionate about poetry. They would teach you how to perform. They would teach you how to write and tailor your poem, like different types of poems in different ways. And they would do volunteer poetry workshops at different high schools around St. Louis. Oh. So I started teaching poetry throughout high school, but then I got a job with a youth arts program to also go into a high school and teach spoken word. When I was 3 years old, my dad visited South Africa. We almost moved there. When I was little, we almost moved to Iran. We almost moved to South Africa. And my dad brought me back this little pouch. And I was like, I love this little pouch. I don't know what it was, but I was like, I'm going to go to South Africa one day. It was like my dream. And so when I got to college, I was like, this is perfect. I can study abroad in South Africa. I can make my dreams come true. So as soon as I was a freshman, I was like, I know that I want to do this. I'm going to do this my sophomore year. Most people do it their junior year. And so I signed up for this human rights program. We went and we stayed in different host families around the country and we studied the history. Apartheid was crazy. It was super evil, horrible. Not going to go down that whole rabbit hole. When I came back to St. Louis, Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri, which is like very close to where my university was. And so that started like a shock wave of both Black Lives Matter movement protests and police killings throughout the country as well. So my junior year was like completely consumed with student protests, student organizing. We started an organization called St. Louis Students in Solidarity, where we would organize like actions and host Know Your Rights workshops and do teach-ins about different aspects of American history and society and activism. And I was also working in the history archives at that time too. I joke with one of my best friends, the only friend I still have from college, and we're like, we didn't prioritize like our classes at all. Like the kids at that school, we were so overworked, so in so many different clubs, like doing too much. I'm not talking about the activism part, but you know, being on every board and being in every club and doing this and doing that and being an RA. It's like we really didn't have time for our classwork. It was kind of crazy. But I learned a lot from building that organization with people and having meetings and teaching Know Your Rights workshops and documenting history and studying history. I feel like is very related to a lot of teaching skills that I use. When you're trying to like communicate a message to like a large group of people, you have to understand how to summarize things and like structure it, right? Mm-hmm. So I was also a teacher assistant in my college. And then my first job out of college was at this nonprofit called College Bound, where I was a college counselor for groups of teenagers who would be the first in their family to apply for college. And the nonprofit was designed to help kids get out of poverty by attending university. And so it would start with kids in 10th grade and it would stay with them all the way through graduating college.
Oh, wow.
So I was pretty much like a caseworker. I was a case manager where we were getting to know every kid individually. We were tracking their grades. We were staying in touch with their parents. We were tutoring And then we were taking them to different events around town, like different cultural exposure events, charity work, like stuff to build their resume. And then we would also teach them about how to apply for college and what college means and like why you would and how to like research your options, apply for financial aid. It was a very intense, holistic, well-rounded, like we're going to support the whole child and making sure that they have food to eat, they have houses. Like St. Louis is like a very, especially at that time, I haven't been back in a while, but like very blighted, like tons of poverty. So yeah, that job being my first job after graduating college it was teaching, but it was like social work and college counseling and tutoring all together.
So it sounds like your lens of education has always had this very like broad and like encompassing view, in that it can affect so many different parts of a child's life. Even when you were talking about the work that your grandparents were doing in Colombia with the indigenous peoples, it sounded like even their education it had this very big force.
Big force.
That's very fascinating.
Yeah.
So eventually you made your way to studying special education to become a teacher.
Yes. That was actually much later. So after graduating college is when a lot of mental health challenges really escalated and kind of became like a wildfire in my life. And I was working in the restaurant industry for a little bit, but I really was trying to get back into things that I was passionate about, things that I loved. I also had some community organizing experience from St. Louis. And so after trying to get on my feet, I was like, okay, let me apply to jobs that align with my interests and the things that I studied. So I got a job for the Stacey Abrams campaign in 2018 as a community organizer. And it was about gathering people to volunteer to reach out to voters. Again, I felt like that had a lot to do with teaching as well, because you're trying to communicate to people, okay, this is not only why you should vote, but this is why you should volunteer to get other people to vote. And then this is how you track data, this is how you do this is how you do that. What was interesting was a group, me and a few other people who were very passionate about our jobs actually got fired from the position because we kept giving suggestions on how we could make our work more efficient or more creative or really like reach people in better ways. And the organization was always like, no, like shut us down. Like every time that we said, what we needed to do our jobs well, or what we think would really help us engage. And they made us sign NDAs, actually. Yeah, because they didn't want us telling people about the ways that we were treated. Because essentially we were like, we joined this organization because we believe in like a better society, better things, better systems. And you say that you're for the people, but like you're not listening to us. And they like really didn't like that. So
that was something that you spoke. That was something you communicated.
I didn't specifically, but one gentleman did in his own words, and there was a group of us who like supported him. So they like cut us out and got rid of us. And so in exchange for signing NDAs, they paid us out the remainder of our contract. That was a very disillusioning experience for me, because I'm working for somebody who is saying that they can help society and help our state and is, believing in the people and like all these things, right? And so I do have family members who have struggled with bipolar, and it does run in my family. And I was for a few years really trying to manage living with mental illness, and really wasn't able to sustainably hold jobs because I was constantly going through this extreme up and down and being hospitalized repeatedly.
Oh my goodness.
So I did always have a job though, and I was always, again, over pushing myself, overextending myself, never like really resting to heal, and never really taking my healing seriously, because I had gone through so much hurt in my life, and I was carrying so much pain, and I was just taking that pain out on myself. I really wasn't I wasn't loving myself, right? Never really feeling like I belonged anywhere, never feeling like I would fit in, feeling like everything around me was just broken, and that everything was just wrong. So eventually I wore myself out so much working at different fast food spots, different restaurants, waitressing, cooking, stuff like that. I did at one point work at a refugee health clinic, which is very interesting, helping people sign up for health insurance. But they lost funding and all this stuff. Again, taking the bus all over Atlanta, overworking my body, my legs like couldn't work anymore. Like I couldn't stand up, barely, like my legs were just like in so much pain. And that's when the COVID shutdown happened. So I did move back home with my parents. I had a lot of anger towards them because of my beliefs at that time about how missionaries were bad and Christianity was bad, and, being hypercritical of my family because I was so broken inside. But my family always fought for me. They always were trying to find me. They were always trying to communicate with me. They never gave up on me. They were always praying for me. They were always showing up for me. They took me back in with open arms. And I had actually applied for grad school back when I was like riding the buses around, like working at fast food restaurants. Like I still was applying to jobs. I was applying to public health positions. I was trying to get jobs at, domestic violence shelters. I wasn't able to get a really professional job anywhere. So I was like, you know what? I'm kind of interested in special education, because back when I was working at that college counseling job, there were a couple kids who had IEPs or learning disabilities, and we didn't find out until halfway through the school year was over. And when I went to the organization I was working with and I said, how can we help these kids? They have learning differences. They're not participating. What can we do? The organization said, oh, we don't deal with that. And I was like, wow, I've attended these elite schools. I've had such a great education. Why don't I know about this? And why is this organization that is so into like comprehensive care on this particular issue, they have no even desire to try anything. So it just really, like, I'm the type of person when I'm like, when I see something that I don't know, I want to like try to understand it or research it. And something about also struggling with mental health made me feel very empathetic for people who have learning disabilities. even though learning was always easy for me, reading was always easy for me, writing was always fun for me, I understand when your brain is coming at things from like a different angle and you feel misunderstood, or you feel like you don't belong, or information is being interpreted differently. Because coming from a household where my parents are two different cultures, I'm constantly translating in between my parents, who, even though they're both speaking English, are just coming from different cultural contexts. And so I've always had a passion for like getting to know how people think and explaining things to them in a way that makes sense to them. So I had applied to get my master's even during all of that, but I didn't get financial aid. I didn't know that I couldn't get financial aid for a master's degree. So it delayed things. And then I applied again, but then I had some really severe setbacks with a manic episode and couldn't go, and then applied a third time. And then I started my degree program. But the job that ended up getting me on my feet and exposed me to business was a job that a friend of my family was working at a bridal sewing shop that was run by a group of Iranian women in downtown Roswell. Again, like Old South, lot of money type vibe. And a lot of the women didn't speak amazing English and didn't really understand American culture. And so I could be this bridge in between both of my cultures, where I could speak to American women and provide them customer service while also managing a sewing shop run by a lot of older immigrant women, and bouncing back and forth, communicating information in these ways, and then like selling products, like selling jewelry, selling hair clips, and keeping track of invoices and payments and everything like that. So these sewing ladies were like, "Oh, you're really good at selling." And I was like, "Really? I don't know." But I did enjoy it. I enjoyed learning about, I don't really care about wedding dresses. I'm not like into that, but I did find it interesting studying the people and understanding their styles, and then suggesting things for them based off of what they liked and what they wanted for their wedding. I did get my master's. Thank God. I really did enjoy it. It was probably the easiest education of my life. I went to Georgia State. Great program. Very good for young working adults. Everybody in the program was already teaching for the most part. I wasn't already teaching at a school. So there were some big learning gaps that I had to fill in.
So I would like to hear about some of your teaching experiences in Atlanta.
When I was getting my master's degree, we had various levels of practicum. And I worked at the Kendesi schools, and then worked for Atlanta Public Schools. And my position at this school called Kimberly Elementary was a really crazy hodgepodge of different responsibilities and tasks that I had to manage, right? So I was pushing in for some classes. I was pulling out for other classes. I was generally helping students on every grade level with every subject with different disabilities. So many different teachers for lots of different kids with different really high needs. Now this school, right off of like Cascade Road, tons of transition, lot of financial instability, kids going through significant mental health challenges, behavior challenges, emotional challenges. So I was actually working with kids with emotional and behavior disorders. I was working with kids with autism. I was working with kids with learning disabilities, kids with dyslexia, kids with intellectual disabilities, kids with ADHD. And so I had to be really quick, and I had to be on the spot figuring out what they need. Do they need new shoes because their feet are hurting because they're toes are being squished. Are they hungry? Are they thirsty? Are they exhausted because they've been up all night for whatever reason? Are they stressed out because of different social dynamics and bullying? Or are they overstimulated? Are they having a meltdown because they really like routine and nobody told them that they would have a substitute that day or that the schedule would be different that day? So I got to help this kid who's like crying and screaming in the middle of the hallway, and a lot of people are yelling at him. You know, I'd have to like keep him safe and keep like the other kids safe. It was definitely highly exhausting. It definitely kept me on my toes. And there's this one powerful story that really led me to start my company. There were these twin girls. Their mom had been on drugs for a long time, including probably when they were being conceived. And they were living with their grandma, housing instability, but sweet girls, great spirit, great attitudes. They made great friends. They always just wanted to learn, and they always tried their best. And you would have never really guessed that they would have had such significant challenges that they were going through, because they were always smiling, always bright. One of the twins, 5th grade, she could not remember the sounds of the alphabet. Like, could not. It was so hard for her. It was really, I mean, to the point where me and another teacher were like, she needs to be tested for an intellectual disability, because it's like, it's not just dyslexia. It's not just a learning disability. It's really not sticking, you know? I was responsible for making sure that she was doing her work in science and social studies. I had to spell out every single word for every answer of every assignment for both classes for her entire 5th grade year, amidst taking care of other students who had learning disabilities and behavior disorders.
Wow.
It took forever to get the testing completed, and she scored 1 point above the threshold for an intellectual disability, so she will never receive services to help her. And when I was begging the administration if I could spend extra one-on-one time with her to continue helping her with her phonics, they said it was illegal for us to teach her anything below a 5th grade level, because she's in 5th grade, she has to be taught 5th grade. And when the person who was responsible for testing, there's only like one person responsible testing for like tons of schools. There's also like one counselor for like many schools. And there's one special education supervisor for like multiple schools. So like you're dealing with people who do have really heavy caseloads, like hundreds and hundreds of students. So I get that. But when a child is in special education, there are certain deadlines that have to be met. And so nobody could get a hold of this lady who was supposed to be a part of the team and helping this child get services. Everybody at the school said, oh, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. That felt like not a great answer. So I ended up calling the district and saying, hey, we're trying to get a hold of this lady who works for the district. Can she answer her email? Like, is that possible? District then contacted the administration, who then brought me to the principal's office and threatened that I could be sued for defamation.
What?
Because I said that she wasn't checking her email. But they were completely ignoring the fact that the special education teachers were being ignored. And in many times, the special education teachers were feeling like they didn't have resources and that they weren't being listened to. And so every time I ended up advocating for students or advocating for special education teachers, I was always vilified. I was saving the kids' breakfast apples and handing them out to them back for their snack, for like an after school snack. And the kids loved it. And again, I got in trouble for it. Time and time again, I'm always like, let's get this kid shoes, let's get this kid glasses. This kid has a problem, like we need to address it. Like I'm always like problem solving. I'm always being shut down. I'm always being treated like I'm a problem.
Wow.
And the culture was very toxic at that school. The principal's no longer there because he ended up getting fired for choking out a kid a couple years after I left. But he would definitely be very inappropriate, always touching the female teachers, always causing gossip and talking about some teachers behind other teachers' backs, and like just being very unprofessional. And actually, there was at one point an article, I think it was an Atlanta Journal-Constitution article, about a woman who worked at that school and sued the district for sexual misconduct from that principal. The district blamed her for having mental health issues and let him stay in his position. And it was a really strange experience where every teacher was unhappy at that school, and every teacher knew that it was like a highly toxic environment, and all of the kids were losing their minds. And this was also the first year back from virtual learning. So after COVID.
Oh my goodness.
So you actually had students who had either missed entire years of school and were trying to learn 4th grade level, but they like the last time they were in school was like in 1st or 2nd grade. Or, you know, you had kids in 1st grade that they actually didn't even know their legal name. Like they only knew like their nickname that their families would call them. And like would be like, what's your name? And they'd be like they didn't know like things for their own safety in society. Major gaps, right? And I saw how the school didn't want parent engagement. The principals would like complain about days when parents would come over, and it was like no PTA, and I was just like so heartbroken. And there were these posters of like all around the school of kids in poverty around the world, like and starving, and like pictures of kids in like war-torn areas. And I've heard that it's the same at John Lewis Academy, but it's like photography to make it look like it's like a global, like conscious, like school. But these were not uplifting pictures. These were kids who were like crying, kids like in like bombed out places, kids in deserts who like looked like very sickly.
Sounds very stressful for little children to.
It was psychologically like horrendous, you know? And this is Atlanta public schools. This is not some fringe, you know, one-off school. I've talked with a lot of teachers who have worked for Atlanta public schools who the good teachers are treated horribly and are bullied to the point where they don't want to work for the school anymore. So it's only teachers who thrive in toxic environments that can really make a career.
So this
in
was
that type of environment. This was my first year teaching at a school in Atlanta full time.
Wow, that's
so. I thought I was so burnt out. I thought I was done with teaching after my first year. I was that exhausted, and I did get a job. I tried some other jobs. They didn't work out. So I ended up working for a tutoring company part-time and also working part-time at a private school for kids with learning disabilities related to language processing.
Okay.
So they didn't have kids with like behavior disorders or kids with intellectual impairments, but they had kids with dyslexia or speech impairments.
Okay. And now this was a private school.
This was a private school in Midtown, very rich, very well resourced. They kind of let the kids pretty much do whatever. And I went from one school where there was so much yelling and putting out fires constantly, to then a school where the kids were like really disrespectful to teachers. And I was seen like I was like this horrible, mean teacher. like I was so strict, and like when kids would be rude to teachers or like rude to me or like talk back, I would be like, don't talk to your teacher that way, or like, no, like don't run off over there. I'm taking you over here. It's my job to keep you safe. Like, please listen to directions. Other teachers actually reported me to supervision saying that I was being inappropriate when I thought I was just taking my job seriously, because I take the safety of children seriously. You know, I'm trying to like follow the rules, and I feel like I deserve respect. Mm-hmm. So not only was I seeing kids with completely different access to resources, in a very similar way, they were both groups of kids were completely detached from feeling emotion and knowing how to channel it, or knowing how to communicate, or knowing how to really like take care of themselves, you know, and like respect other people. So working for the tutoring company, I ended up working again in a refugee population. I was working at a library where then I had different refugee women coming to me and being like, I like the way that you teach. Will you teach my kid? Oh, I really like the way that you're teaching math. I can't get anybody to teach math that way. Please, will you teach my kid? And so eventually I just started getting my own clients. Mm-hmm. And at the private school, the admin was begging for me to stay and offered me a full-time position. But I felt like socially, I was very outcast there. And so because I felt like I couldn't find anywhere professionally that I could really grow as a teacher, but I clearly had skills, I could form my own program that blended all of these things, talking with the parents, developing a custom program, listening to the children, giving them that one-on-one time. And I felt like I could just be more effective in society and really give back to people by just being myself and starting my own business. And even though I didn't have business experience, again, the learning process has been so fun for me that it keeps me very driven. And so to see it grow into what it is today, just a year and a half later, is like truly a huge blessing. I'm just really, really thankful.